You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, let's turn to a challenge that's facing every C-suite executive, not to mention every policymaker, university dean, teacher, you name it, who's trying to work at improving diversity and inclusion in their business, school, etc. How do you try and bring people up who face inequality and discrimination without simply focusing on the numbers, simply filling in the checkboxes? Michèle Lamont, a professor of sociology at Harvard, tried to answer this question, and she went out and interviewed over 180 cultural leaders around the country. She wrote about her findings in the book, Seeing Others, How Recognition Works and How It Can Heal a Divided World. So, Michèle, academic inequality is a key piece of the polarization, the cultural polarization that you describe in your book. But you think it's a pretty limited way of understanding why some people succeed, why other people lag. Explain.
Well, there's several aspects to this question. One of them is that when large organizations are putting in place a diversity program, they're not necessarily spending enough time thinking about the cultural change that are needed to make people feel that they belong. And members of dominant groups, white people, men, tend to be very much at the center of the conversation and are often located more centrally in the space, for instance. So my book is very much about how to make more people feel worthy. And if we think of the role of organization, well, for instance, putting together programs that reward people for being parents and make it possible for people to bring their older parents to the doctor, giving some flexibility in work hours, for instance, are the kind of policies that can really make a difference.
I love that. I just want to jump in, Michèle, because we only have a few minutes with you, and I want to make sure we get to everything on our long list of questions here. But you bring up something that's so interesting in the wake of the way that the workplace has changed post-pandemic, if we can call this post-pandemic. I certainly feel like we are in a different world when it comes to flexibility. I feel totally comfortable going to doctor's appointments, bringing my kid to doctor's appointments, approaching my managers about these things in a way that I didn't before the pandemic, because, not everybody comes into work 5 days a week these days. I mean, how do you do this in a way where we have a distributed workforce?
Yeah. Well, those are positive changes. But what has come also with the pandemic is that some of the aspects of life that are really sustained by regular work is that we build relationship with our coworkers. We feel seen by them. And as more of us are spending more time fixated on our computers and being evaluated by algorithms, interacting with data more than with people, the sense of how we gain recognition from the workplace is really diminishing. And that's a real problem for Gen Zs who have such a desire to feel more social inclusion and to really value equality of life, not only working to make money, but working to have rich relationships that allows them to really be all they want to be in life.
So
those are some of the...
Is this the argument for return to office from a diversity and inclusion perspective?
Not really. I think my focus is not necessarily... The argument is really about how to create a workplace that is more fulfilling for people because they feel more worthy, they feel more valued in the eyes of their coworkers. So how to create structures that allow them to develop relationships that are deeper.
How do you do that in a world where remote workers are not the exception anymore?
Well, by creating opportunities for people to really, if you create an environment where there's more emphasis on allowing people to live authentically and to bring their best self. I taught during the pandemic, and I remember my undergraduates saying, you really need to, in the classroom, create a culture that allows us to bring our best self. And I was very puzzled. I asked them, what do you mean? They say, I don't want to feel like I have to be in this environment where I'm supposed to present a picture of who I am that is untrue, or I have to be exposed to ideas that are really contrary to what I value. So, of course, that's part of the educational system to learn about ideas that are not familiar or agreeable to you. But there's a focus put on authenticity by young people that future employers really need to think about if they want to retain them.
But to some degree, everyone puts on some sort of persona when they go to the office, right? Whether it's, doing your hair more nicely than you would on the weekend, or putting on nicer clothes. I mean,
yes.
Is it too much?
But there's huge variation in the extent to which this is people can disclose their real selves. Think, for instance, of people who've had miscarriages at work. I mean, how much do they talk about this? How free do they feel that they can reveal this drama to their supervisor? There's some environment in which we're all expected to present who we are in a very formal way. And there's others that are much more open to experiencing people, through their authentic self. So these are some of the considerations that the book is talking about in terms of inclusion. And also promoting diversity is not only about numbers. It's also, as you said earlier, it's very much about signaling that everyone belongs by, for instance, the way the offices are distributed, who are going to be receiving the offices that are in the corner far away from everyone, and who's going to be more at the center of the networks. Those are among the questions that employers may want to consider.
Michèle, I think one challenge that I think about when you talk about authenticity is what we see in Washington today and what we see from our politicians here in the United States. Authenticity is not a word I would use to describe the interactions, the relationships that take place there. And I'm wondering how we do this in a world where the behavior, for what's modeled for us is sort of the polar opposite.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And when we think about the very large percentage of the American population that doesn't vote, it's in particular because they perceive people in DC as extremely fake. And I think as the working class is really being, courted by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as well, there's a real need to have discussion within each party about how are they able to better appeal to the working class, in part by signaling that they value authenticity and people being more real, if you want. So there's such a class divides in the political culture and between the elite, the college-educated professionals who dominate the workplace and who dominate DC, that I think if we want more people to take democracy seriously and to be invested in our society, there's really a need to think and to discuss the place of sincerity and authenticity as we interact with each other at work and also in the political world.
Weigh in a little bit on the impact of the Supreme Court's decision to really narrow affirmative action to essentially remove this from being a strong criteria that universities can use. I mean, there is some speculation that this or some form of this rule may get applied to the workplace as well. I mean, talk to me about how business leaders can get past this.
I don't think it will be very easy. If you think of the rulings as it applies to higher education, there's this clause that says students can write essays. So it's true that there's certainly a possibility for universities to slightly get around this. But in a Supreme Court that is dominated by 6 Supreme Court judges who are fundamentally conservative, it's absolutely predictable that they will go after affirmative action at many different levels. And yet, I think our workplaces are already extremely diverse. So we can think of many contexts in which those who do the evaluation will find ways to create the kind of workplace that is reflexive of, what the future of American society is in terms of diversity, but also in terms of the population that they are serving. As the number of non-whites is increasing rapidly in the U.S., all organizations that provide services will want also to have a staff that with whom the clients can relate. So I think that bureaucratic processes are not functioning in isolation from real life. And at that level, I'm somewhat optimistic about the opportunity to go around the rules, if you will.
Michèle, we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon on Bloomberg Businessweek. Michèle Lamont is professor of sociology at Harvard. Her new book, Seeing Others, How Recognition Works and How It Can Heal a Divided World. It's out now.